Welcome everybody, my name is Manuel Martinez and this is another episode of Career Downloads where basically each episode I hit the refresh button and bring on a different guest to learn more about their experience, their background, and really how they manage their career over time with the goal to really help you understand and pick up different techniques that you can use to be able to manage your own career. So for today's episode, I have with me Karen Ahern. So Karen, we have worked together in the past and even currently. So she used to be one of my directors when I worked for higher education. And then eventually she moved into a teaching role where she became a program director and then kind of brought me on to be a part-time faculty instructor. So with that, let's welcome Karen.
Hi,
Okay.
Thanks for having me.
No, thanks. Thanks for coming on. And when I was kind of looking at your background, so I know that you've spent basically your entire career within higher education.
Yes.
But within that, you've done a number of different positions. You've kind of moved around a little bit. And one of the things that was really interesting to me was kind of how you came, and again, you'll be able to help fill in the gap for me, is when you got out of college, you almost kind of went into a role almost right away.
Right.
Got it.
Yeah.
So then just real quick, can you just tell me what your current position is? And I know I said, program director, but if you can tell me exactly what the position is and kind of what are your overall responsibilities?
Sure. So right now I'm a professor in the Computing and Information Technology Department at College of Southern Nevada. So I'm also the networking program director. So I oversee the program direction for our Cisco networking degree and now our cloud systems administration degree. So and people's entryway into IT careers, we have cybersecurity, software development, but I kind of focus over the infrastructure and sysadmin, desktop user support type roles right now. So I do that and I run our advisory committee. I pull together people like yourself, professionals from the industry, and to provide input and host events and things like that to connect students to jobs, to good paying IT jobs.
That's awesome. So now that we kind of know where you're at and what you're doing, you mind going back and just kind of give us a little bit of background? It doesn't have to be extensive, but just kind of where you grew up and eventually what got you interested in technology, whether, I touched on it, kind of already gave people a sneak peek that you did go to college. So just kind of what drove you towards that route?
Yeah, so it was kind of an accident because I didn't grow up playing with computers or tinkering around like a lot of women. I went to dance class, I played soccer, I did, but I was pretty open-minded and I really had no idea what I wanted to do. So if you're practical, you think, well, I'll go get a business degree and then figure it out from there. So I ended up, I was working at Bank of America in their call center. I went to UNLV and CSN. And it just happened when I was 19 years old. My dad's had a colleague whose wife she worked at CSN as a software asset manager. And she happened to ask me one day, what are you gonna do with your life? And I'm like, I don't know, I'm just gonna get a business degree. So she basically took it upon herself to say, no, do you like computers? I'm like, well, okay. She goes, okay, well, you're going to major in, she goes, there's a management information systems major that you can do at UNLV. Here's the pathway. And by the way, we need part-time computer lab assistants so you can come work at the college. And I was attending CSN at the time. So she almost kind of set me up. And so I had no better idea. And I've always felt like you should be flexible when you're not sure of your direction. So that's how I ended up kind of on the pathway. I worked in the computer lab and started, took that business and IT. I knew I probably didn't want to be a computer science major at the time. So that seemed like a happy medium in the business school. So I ended up going that direction.
Nice. And that's good to, it's something that a lot of people don't talk about is trying to find a mentor. And it looks like you found one almost by accident.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Through my dad. I was really fortunate. I wouldn't even be here. I wouldn't have made it. I wouldn't have thought of IT. I've never even thought of it if she hadn't mentioned it. So.
And then so she kind of set you on that path, and as you started to kind of learn more about working in the computer labs, getting at least I get it's some experience, or at least exposure. Let's call it exposure.
Right.
And during that exposure, did you start to gain more of an interest in it and say, okay, hey, I do like technology, or this is something I can see a career in? Or was it just like, well, I'll try it and see what happens?
Yeah, at first it was kind of, I didn't really know, because I didn't know much about the field at all. So I just kind of, worked in the lab and ended up, working around people that were fixing the computers, imaging the machines and PCs. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. But I was still very part-time student. I was working, at Albertsons grocery store. I was still kind of very part-time, and I was into Irish dancing at the time. So I was doing that as well. But then what happened is when I turned 21, my father passed away. So suddenly I had to help my mom pay the mortgage. So that kind of, all of a sudden you got to work full time. So I started talking to the computer lab manager there. I said, hey, can I get some more hours? And he said, sure. And by the way, I started helping them out with, rolling PCs around, plugging crossover cables and imaging PCs and some of that old school stuff, doing, running around with floppy disks, doing BIOS updates, real old school stuff. And then after a while, I didn't really have a lot of experience, but after a little while, they said, well, you don't have a lot of experience yet, but we have this administrative assistant job open, but it's full time. So I said, oh, great, I need a full-time job. So they actually brought me in as an admin assistant. So I had to do contracts and things like that because I didn't have enough experience yet to be a systems specialist at the time. So I ended up kind of, as an administrative assistant, they started giving me some more tasks. So I was part-time administrative assistant, part-time learning how to be a PC tech at the time.
Well, and you mentioned you're going to school for business degree. So I mean, while it's not fully business, but being that administrative assistant, looking at contracts, things of that nature, you're getting exposure now towards the business side as well, right? And not just on the technical side. So you still obviously went to school and continued that.
Yeah.
Did you, and I apologize, I don't remember here, you had your MIS degree, or is it a business degree?
It's a business degree, but management information systems is the emphasis. So it's the degree path generally is to train you to be a CIO. I think that's the idea. So you do get some technical classes in there, but you get a lot of business classes as well. You'll get like database classes, programming, not anywhere to the degree of engineering at all, but you do get you get exposure to both, project management, things like that. So I didn't have it yet. It actually took me quite a long time because I was working full time and paying for school to complete it. And I also ended up taking extra classes that didn't transfer to my degree, like that class I teach now at CSN, the CompTIA A+ IT Essentials class. I ended up needing to go take that because I needed more background on how to tear the PC apart and fix it and things like that. So
just kind of more courses to try and develop skills as opposed to try and point you towards completion of a degree.
Yeah, so it made the degree take longer, but then I got more practical skills because I was taking the side courses, which were at the college, which was obviously helpful. So I'm pretty much working in the IT department as their administrative assistant, and they're training me kind of simultaneously I'm doing help desk calls, and it was a while back, so we didn't have the full help desk that you have with ServiceNow. There was not a big help desk at that time, so that was kind of me doing that and doing tech work and doing contracts. And it did give me some exposure up the chain of command at the college, which was nice as an admin assistant because you see a lot, even though you don't have any power as an administrative assistant. But you do get copied on a lot of interesting emails. So yeah, that was kind of interesting on how the business functions.
Nice.
Yeah.
So then now, as you're obviously working, you're going to school part-time, what kind of transpired from there? So did you decide to continue just staying at CSN as a part-time lab and just kind of work that administrative assistant job? Or did it become something like waiting until you finished your degree before you tried to move up? Or how did that?
No, actually, it worked out good because I was kind of willing to take on any task because I knew I didn't have any experience. At that time, Macs were not popular and nobody wanted to fix them. And we had a whole graphics department, Photoshop, and we had a lot of classrooms with Macs and no one wanted to fix them. So I said, hey, I'll do that. And so I ended up becoming the Mac tech for the college, and we had multiple campuses. So it was fun because you know all the artistic graphics arts people, and they would have the Macs. They weren't quite that cool yet, but they were those gumdrop Macs and some of that stuff, Apple G4s, G5s, stuff like that for people that have been around. So I ended up getting basically the Apple Macintosh certifications for laptops and desktops. So after I did that, I still was in school. I hadn't finished. But because I kind of took that initiative on and started working on the Macs, after a while they decided, as the administrative assistant, they decided, hey, she's taking on kind of a critical role. So then a position for an actual IT position, a system specialist at the time, came up. And so then I was able to apply for that. And I had enough experience as working as an administrative assistant, but 70% of the time doing IT work to qualify for it. So it only took about a year. So it really wasn't that long after I had that full-time foot in the door position as the admin assistant for the IT department for it to transition. So I guess I was lucky that I had a good mentor as well. I had another mentor after that who was interested in he knew that I had, some aptitude and interest. And the more I worked with the systems, the more I was like, hey, I could do this. I can fix computers. I never thought I could do that before. But, when you fix something, it gives you a little rush like, oh, I'm kind of smart. So I can do this. So that kind of gave me a motivation to keep going and say, okay, I think I want to stick around in IT.
And initially, you probably didn't look at it as, hey, I'm trying to differentiate myself. You're just like, well, nobody else wants to do it. I'm just going to pick it up. And that
I want to be helpful. I want to be useful, and I want to get skills wherever I can. So kind of like what I tell my students now. I say, you may say I want to be in cybersecurity and I want to be a pen tester, but you're probably not going to be a pen tester right out the bat. You're going to need to know how to build a network and troubleshoot and you're probably going to do user support maybe. So just be flexible and you'll be surprised what you end up learning. So yeah, they were very eager to teach me because I was eager to learn, and I didn't complain about grunt work tasks that they gave me. I didn't care. I'd crawl around under desks and run cables and things like that. I didn't really mind. So I just wanted to learn.
Right, and and they're starting to see probably your drive to kind of do more. You're also you're not complaining. They're seeing your work ethic. Even though it started off as a part-time job, but the more you're doing, the more that they see that you're a good worker, you're not a complainer, you have a good attitude.
Mm-hmm.
That's
flexible.
Yeah, flexible, and then they're starting to see that this is somebody I want to be around, or I would enjoy working with. Right.
Right.
Nice. And so now you've become this PC technician. You've differentiated yourself as a Mac technician.
Yeah, specializing in Macs.
Specializing in Macs. And how long did you do that for? And at what point? And I'm sure you'll get to it. Did you finish your degree? And then kind of what was the next step moving on from a Mac technician to kind of your next role?
Yeah, so I was what later became became user services, user support. So I worked on Macs. I ended up working on PCs as well and some different projects. After I did that for actually about, I don't know, it was a good 4 or 5 years kind of in that role. And eventually when a new company came in to outsource our IT department at the college, they reorganized the department. So we had some new opportunities. And at the time I was still kind of in the same role. I was doing some project management as well, while also, working as a tech. And at that time, I had a manager that was really cool. He was a great guy. He came from the East Coast, and a position, a user services manager position, came up. And I didn't think I was as qualified because I'd spent a lot of time working on Macs. I did a lot of the PC work. I did PC work too, but not nearly as much, and kind of had a little, I don't know, that imposter syndrome that happens quite a bit, I think, in IT. And maybe because I was one of the few women. There was only at that time, I think there was only maybe 1 or 2 women, between all of the IT departments. There was or all the entire IT organization at that time. So, you feel a little, insecure, but because there's guys around me that know a lot more. So, but he basically said, you should apply for the manager position. And that's all it took. I'm like, well, you think I should? He goes, yes, you should. You'd be great for it. So I wouldn't have applied for it had he not made that suggestion. So it's really important to have, if you're a manager or a director or a mentor, just telling your staff like that, hey, I think you should apply. I mean, that made all the difference for me. And that kind of set me on a better path there, I would say. So I ended up applying for the job, getting it, even though apparently there was another guy that was a shoo-in for it, supposedly, but the other people on the committee, including my former manager, argued that I'd be a better fit. And fortunately, the director at the time would listen. And so they chose me, and I ended up being the user services manager, which was more fun because I managed a team for a campus and got to do more projects and start, selecting the technology, buying the PCs, and, getting into, working with stuff like, tracking technology and different projects and things like that. So that was another step up, managing our new service desk that we had. So that was a lot of fun. And then from there, I started promoting pretty much. So once I hit that manager position, then next was director. So that was my next step after that.
And I want to kind of pull back a little bit. So you mentioned something important, like that manager at the time told you not only to apply, but did he provide any additional feedback as to why he thought you would be good, or was it just like, hey, you should apply, and that was it?
Yeah, he didn't really, but I think it was all I needed just to, and it would have been helpful probably to get a little bit more, but I think a lot of it had to do with soft skills, and leadership capabilities. So I think he thought that I could, and being able to take charge of a task, like, hey, if I need you to go out into the lab and, swap out all of the old mechanical drives and put in new SSDs, he knew he could just give me that task and I could organize it and run it, and even grab another lab assistant or another tech and do that. So I think from working with him, he saw that I could do that. But a lot of it was, he thought, the feedback that he had given me, he thought it was like personality, like soft skills and being a team player, was kind of the feedback that he gave me. They thought I would make a good fit for managing a team at the time.
No, that's great. And you're not the first person that said that. It's just that they've had somebody else basically advocate, or at least give that feedback and say, hey, have you ever considered this, or have you tried looking at this? And a lot of times we don't realize the impact that could do for somebody else. Like, somebody else could have probably seen that. He could have seen that you would have been great for it and just assumed, oh, she's good. She's good. She knows she's going to apply. Instead of, telling you after the fact, why didn't you apply?
Yeah. That was really important, because I thought maybe I'd like to do it, but I just figured these 3 other guys who are applying they're smarter than me. They're better than me. So why would I, So yeah, a little bit of an imposter syndrome, a little bit of insecurity. I was kind of young too, so you don't have a lot of experience yet. Still I think I was in my mid-20s. So and I hadn't finished my degree yet. I took a long time to get through my degree. So I got a few IT certifications along the way, but because I was already in the organization, they didn't have hard requirements for having a degree yet, but they knew I was on the path and I'd finish it. So I ended up getting my degree. I think I was already a director by the time I actually finished my bachelor's degree.
Okay. So then that transition from manager to director, right? So how long were you a manager, and what do you think were the big differences in kind of moving from that level role to the next one, right? So I know that a lot of times that's a big difference to go from, like an individual contributor to then going and being a manager. Like, it's a different skill set. It is a more people, the technical acumen it's good to at least have an understanding and know, like, you don't have to be the expert on everything. That's why you have the individual contributors. But now as you're moving up to the director level, there's still soft skills, but there's also it's a different level of soft skills and additional, trying to think of what the word is, but there's different requirements, right? Like, the job is different. So because now you're not managing a direct team, you're managing a team that's managing another team.
Yeah, so I had 2 different director positions, and there was a pretty big difference. I had the user services director, which was managing a bunch of still user services. In that role, I was more of just the role of managing, Windows upgrades on campus. When are we going to do that? And buying, what's the refresh cycle with the PCs? So it becomes more of a project manager kind of role. And then also, mentoring people and hiring people and bringing them in. And I was still kind of young, so I didn't quite get that transition, because sometimes, you need a mentor, but then you're supposed to be a mentor. And especially when you're a director, you get that D title, it's like, okay, now people really expect you to be, even more professional too. So dress more, professionally, even than a manager. A manager's still crawling around under, running cables around and hauling PCs and printers and things like that. But the director is, that was more of a, obviously considered like more of an executive type. So then you're interacting with other higher level people at the college, and that's where that, I think those soft skills are even more important. And then organizational skills. So so that's where like the project management skills you learn play a big role. Can you manage projects and deadlines and keep people motivated? Don't micromanage them, but keep people on task and keep people happy. You manage expectations, right? From, at this point it was the college versus, they want a project done. All these different departments have competing needs for projects and technology, and you kind of have to figure that out. So like you said, you don't really have to, I'm not working on technology anymore, which is, was kind of a bummer because that's fun to play with technology and learn new things. And now you're managing people and projects and relationships. And that's, that was really a critical skill. So I think that kind of played to my strength. So that's kind of why I ended up, it almost was like a natural progression going that direction.
And those, now, as it sounds like you just kind of almost were, I don't want to say thrown into it, but
yeah,
you didn't have that mentorship, right? To kind of say, hey, let's go through, because I'm assuming, especially at the director level now, maybe you don't have a final say, but you're more involved now in like budgets and project management. You mentioned all these things. Nowadays, I mean, basically any skill or anything that's up there, I mean, you can go do a quick YouTube search and say, okay, hey, project management skills, how to do budgets. Like there's a vast amount of ways to pick up and understand or learn that knowledge. At the time that you're going through this, are you really just on the job learning on your own and trying to figure it out? Is it a lot of trial, error? Is it, are you reading books? Is going to college helping? Or are you also, reaching out to other people? Like, are you, you mentioned the imposter syndrome. Are you starting to establish at least some sort of confidence or understand that I might have to rely on other people as opposed to just doing it all myself?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, even from the first director position that I had two. I had direct user services director and then senior director of technology services, which was a pretty big jump there, I would say. That was more of a larger director jump for me than going from user services manager to director. But because now I have infrastructure team and software developers, and a lot of people under me and a lot of technology I didn't really know about. But so yeah, I got really good at asking. I think I've always been pretty good about asking for help. So a lot of people don't want to do that. And that's really, I think, a weakness. If you're not willing to say, hey, I don't know this, and ask a lot, you'll be in trouble, especially at, I think, those higher levels. You have to listen to the people that are experts in your team, and then you have to make good decisions. You have to listen to the people that are experts on your team, and then you have to figure out what, in my case, the CIO wants too. Because the CIO will want certain things or have certain strategic directions that they're working out with the college. And so you have to kind of manage both, So I think some of the business school classes were helpful. I think the project management class was helpful. Some of the organizational management classes were helpful. Most of it was on the job. I'd go to my boss and ask, because he was very good about, he knew that, this was like my first director role, so I'd need some advice. And I would say at the time, the company, we worked for the college, but we were outsourced by a third-party company, and they actually had some leadership training and things like that, so that I would make sure I took advantage of those training opportunities because they were really helpful. And then I was able to go talk to a senior director that was the equivalent at another school, another institution. So that was really nice, because I was at CSN, but that director might be from another school somewhere across the country, and we could share stories. So yeah, I'd say at that time it was a little bit with business school, but mostly my boss and then some of those training opportunities. So having a good boss really helped, and just opening my mouth a lot and asking for help. And then you get your stride faster when you ask for help. And there's trial and error, of course, but I try to read a person. If I'm, making them angry or I try to read and ask, okay, well, how do you feel about this task? Or how do you feel about this project? Or, I think instead of just directing to people, hey, take care of this project, allowing them to give me feedback made my job easier, because you have a lot of smart brains that are reporting up to you, so you need to utilize those. I can't think of every angle, so a lot of that asking helped as being a director too, to get things done that I couldn't get done because I don't have the expertise to do everything that needs to get done, essentially all these projects.
And then that is a big part of it, right? Is being able to communicate with people and understand, because that's not something that I don't think I would have thought to ask the question, how do you feel about this? Mine would have been more like, why should we do this or why shouldn't we? Instead of asking that person, like, how do you feel about this? They're still going to give you that same information, but now you're starting to, and this is something that I didn't learn until later on in life, is when you start to ask people how they feel, like there's a reason that they do or don't want to do something, right? Like, how do you feel about doing this? Well, I don't want to do this because I think it's going to lead towards this type of outcome, or this is already going to put more stress on me or my team, or hey, I really want to do it this way because X, Y, and Z. Really, as much as we try to be very technical or down the line, emotions play a big part in we're doing that. And how do you think, even as an individual contributor, so what is something that you would think would be helpful for somebody when it comes to like emotional intelligence, right? Everybody talks about like IQ, learning all these skills, like how do I learn how to program or be a cybersecurity and identify what vulnerabilities I have. But it's very important to also understand how to interact with people. So what would you say is a good, how would you recommend, or what do you think that somebody should do to kind of pick up those skills along with their technical skills?
So one thing, now that I'm in a teaching role, I kind of, it's a work in progress. I'm always, no matter how good you think you are at something, you should be self-reflective, right? Introspective, and I think, there's situations I run into with colleagues now where I'm like, oh, I didn't handle that great, or, I don't really like that person per se, but that doesn't really matter. Like, what could I have done to make that interaction better? Because we all have to work with all types of people. We like, we don't like, we hate sometimes. I mean, it runs a gamut, and you have to work on projects. So I think being really introspective and thinking about a situation, even if you're really angry, just thinking about, well, what could I have done better to make the situation better? Because you can only control yourself. You can't control other people. And just listening. Like, I'm a talker. I like to talk. But I try to listen a lot and ask, same thing, when I ask them how they feel about a project or what they think, I guess giving someone a sense of that their input matters, that helps with those emotional intelligence. If you just even if somebody, doesn't matter what level they are at the organization, you can ask them what they think or feel or how they would approach. I remember the first time, some high level, I was still at tech actually when we first got outsourced, and we were kind of freaked out because these suits showed up at the college and said, hey, you're going to report to this company now. You're no longer working directly for the college. So that was a little bit scary. I almost was in tears because you knew it was going to happen. But I remember one of the directors was asking me how things were running, and he said, well, how would you do it? How would you approach that? And I thought, he's asking me? Like, it was, giving my input. So I think having that rapport with people, like talking to them and asking them about what they're doing and how their day is. And then also, one thing I tell my students is networking. I mean, a lot of people don't want to network, but it's really important to develop those skills. There's the traditional, public speaking, go to Toastmasters, maybe that works, I don't know. But for me, it's always been just getting out there and forcing myself to go out and network and talk to people and then ask them, like, what are you doing? Like, what do you like about IT, or what do you like about your job, or how is it working at X company? So just talking and asking people a lot of questions about them and what they do. I think that helps with the emotional intelligence, and just people need to feel like you're listening to them and they're being heard. And when that happens, and they'll want to connect with you a little bit more, and also email, text, like Teams now or whatever. I've always tried to not, especially if I'm feeling emotional, like irritated with somebody, type the email, don't send it right away. I try to take a nicer tone. I've heard some people are using AI now to help. Could you rewrite this email with an empathetic tone? Because I know I come across a little snarky.
Right.
So I think maybe some AI tools work for that. But I've always kind of tried to really be careful about my communication and think about how that person's going to take the message I'm giving them. And and then also thinking about myself, like, how could I do better? And then that allowed me to open up and improve my emotional intelligence, because then people were more willing to give me feedback. For example, one of the managers that reported to me, he was an older guy, a boomer, if you will, but he was great, because I would start to type and get really busy because I'm managing all these things, and he'd come into my office to talk to me, and I'd just be typing, that kind of thing, where your boss isn't paying attention to you. And he'd go, Karen, look at me when I'm talking to you. I need you to listen to me. And we had a good enough rapport where I'm like, instead of getting upset with him, I thought, no, I'm being a jerk right now. Okay, put the keyboard down. Let me listen to what you're saying. This is important. So being able to adjust if you get feedback like that from people, not getting offended by it, and just, trying to engage, I think just trying hard to listen is, I guess, long story longer here.
Right. and you mentioned something, right? Like, it's hard for many people, and I know early on, right? You're emotional when you're getting feedback, and you don't realize that feedback is something that is obviously it's going to be beneficial for you.
Yeah.
Now,
even if it doesn't feel like it at the time.
If it doesn't feel like it at the time, or even if that person, maybe the way that they're delivering it, right? Maybe they're giving you, they're telling you something. Maybe it is very snarky. Maybe it's very like sarcastic, because that's just their personality. That's the way they deliver it. But you almost kind of, I had somebody else that mentioned the same thing. Like, you kind of have to weed through it a little bit more on your own and understand, okay, they were being snarky, but what were they trying to tell me?
Right.
And why?
And what's going on in their world that made them maybe it's their personality. We've got, I think especially in technology, you get a lot of very smart people, and they often think they're the smartest person in the room. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. But, sometimes I kind of, try to look at the motivation. Like you said, what was that person saying and where are they coming from? And try to separate myself, like they're not, even if they are maybe attacking me or whatever, trying to like put up that, okay, well, let's stick to the policy, let's stick to the topic, and not try to get down that emotional rabbit hole, because then you'll just be angry that doesn't work. And sometimes if you can stick to what they're trying to tell you and why, you can sometimes you'll get a better rapport, and actually they'll be less snarky and less, maybe less sarcastic, down the line, because you're listening to what they're saying and you're not getting, offended by how they're saying it.
And is that something that, have you gotten better at it over time? Like, if you think about it, when you first started, especially as a manager, you're being young and, in your 20s, I'm thinking back to myself in my 20s, and I was quick to react.
Yeah.
Right. Especially like
Me
someone
too.
would say something, and I was, oh man.
Yes.
It took a while, and even now, there's
Yeah.
times where it took until now where I've learned that it takes me a second. So, are there any techniques or skills that you've done? So, for example, me, one of the things is I've started reading a lot of books lately, and one of the big things, and I've seen it come up a couple times, is before you react, take a breath.
Yes.
It's just that simple breath of just,
Yes.
and I'm like, and then like just that quick breath makes a difference. Is that, obviously you say that you do that, but is there anything else that kind of helps?
I actually learned that my dad, and of course it didn't sink in till we're older, right? So I thought when I was younger, I thought being opinionated was a virtue, and it's not. So it's great to have an opinion and speak your mind, but you're not always right. And you're not always, even if you are right in this area, maybe you're not seeing a perspective that you should, because we're an individual human being. We can't see all the angles all the time. So the deep breath. I remember my dad told me that his grandmother told him because he was kind of a hothead when he was young, like count to 10 and breathe in and out. And so now it's funny, I didn't really use that much when I was younger, but I learned after getting smacked a couple of times, being wrong and then being put in my place to calm down, and to realize that, that knee-jerk reaction, and to this day I'll still do it sometimes too. I think we're not perfect, sometimes something really gets under your skin, so you just still have to kind of take a deep breath and figure out what's the best way to handle the situation, and don't not get so emotionally invested, because I think that's what gets us so upset at work, and people get burned out too, and they get a little too emotionally invested in all these decisions other people are making and their reactions to us. Right. So there's that, and then so reading's helped. I've reading a book, Malcolm Gladwell book right now, like how to talk to people that, I got the title wrong, but it's like talking to strangers, essentially, what to know about people you don't know. And there's some, insight in there about, just having random conversations, kind of like the emotional intelligence, having these random conversations with people on a plane, or maybe not on a plane if you want to talk to them, but, right. But just having random conversations, building your emotional intelligence, and just kind of gaining that larger perspective that we probably do get as we get older. We're kind of tunnel vision when we're young. It helps you kind of relax and not just react immediately. So that's my big thing. And sometimes going and talking to somebody else about it, it's nice. My husband's great. He's a really good partner. I can talk to him, talk to my mom. I have a couple of friends. I have a couple of colleagues at work where I can almost run anything by them. So that also, I think, helps. That's your network. That way you're like, okay, this person just said something to me or told me that my work was bad and I want to strangle them. So now, let me go talk to somebody else, and before I react and say, am I overreacting or what? And sometimes that person you talk to will say, well, maybe the person was coming from this angle. And that helps a lot, I think. So
even if they're not, right? Like even if you're just venting out and saying, and they're like, nope, you're totally right. Well, okay, now you've at least taken that step back and say, okay, so I was right? Because a lot of times, most of the time, we're wrong, right? I'll tell you, I'm like, I'm wrong. I should have done this.
I'm learning I'm wrong a lot nowadays. Yeah.
But even if you're right, now when you go back and address it, you've taken time to say, okay, all right, I am correct. How am I going to do this instead of just being, you're not going to go back and be like, I was right.
Yeah.
Right? You're going to go like, hey, you're in a calmer state of mind to address it.
Yeah.
When you are right or wrong, both ways happen. And I think you're right, talking to somebody that understands who you are, right? Mm-hmm. And knows that, hey, this is when you get emotional. One of the things that I always had a problem with is I was quick to answer. And I found out that I got diagnosed with ADHD. Like I never knew, like people would always make comments like, oh man, you're a squirrel, right? Like it was just everywhere. But it wasn't until later on that I found out that a lot of me, I would interrupt people a lot. And people took that as, he just thinks he's smarter, he knows, but it was just the way that my brain is wired. Someone would be talking, like, I'd be quick to try and relate to them or help them, or, I know what you're going to,
I know what you're going to say before you say it.
Yeah, I think I know what you're going to say. So that, I went through and once I got diagnosed, started and go through with a therapist and understand and say, okay, hey, here's techniques that you can do is, when you do it. And I still have that tendency, but I'll go and I'll hold myself back. I'm like, hold on. Let me kind of go back. So,
same here, actually. I tended to talk over people. The same thing. I'm just so excited. I just want to talk, I want to contribute. And then, you're talking over me, then I'd have to, okay, stop talking, wait, take a breath before you respond, listen to the whole conversation. Because oftentimes, as you probably noticed too, like we wouldn't predict correctly what they were going to say.
Yes.
Wrong, yeah. So,
most of the time.
Or like if your boss, same thing, like if your boss is telling you, something and you want to show your boss you're smart when you're young. Like, oh, we can fix that by doing X, Y, Z. And wait a minute, let me finish the whole goal. Let me tell you the goal of the project before you start yip-yapping at me right away about how you're so smart. So yeah, I think patience is a huge thing. I mean, when I say listening and patience, being patient with people is really important. I mean, I think after you have kids too, you kind of learn that as well. Like you really got to be patient because people aren't going to do what you want and they're not going to always admire your intelligence or, so, but you have to figure out how to work with people. And I think that's like, no matter what technology you learn, you can learn a lot of different things, but you're always going to have to work with people. So a lot of people go into IT, for example, and say, well, they want to work in the basement as the programmer. I don't like people. Well, the world's not really like that. Unfortunately, you're going to have to work on a project and you're going to have to work with people. So you're going to have to figure that out. It doesn't mean you have to be great at it all the time, but like I said, like in your case, you figured, I probably have some of the same. I never went and got diagnosed. Maybe I should go get diagnosed. Maybe I should go. But it's the same thing, taking those breaths and waiting and not realizing that your trigger, like I get tense, like I get really upset. And then I have to go, okay, you're getting upset. I take a breath, maybe go look at your phone and, look at Instagram for a minute or something, and do something like that. Maybe go take a walk for a second, especially working from home. Like I'll do that, get up from my desk. Okay, I'm gonna go change some laundry out really quick instead of being angry, do something like that. That way you're channeling that out and then you can approach the situation with a little more, calmness. So, because you don't want people to think, especially as a woman, I feel, and this happens to men too, I feel like a lot of times they'll think you're emotional, and I would get that. I got that feedback from a boss one time. He's like, you're just being too emotional. And right away, the feminist in me wanted to be like, oh, you're just saying that because I'm a woman in IT. And then I did have to take a step back and go, no, I was being emotional. I need to calm down. He's right, so.
Right, but that is something that it's different, right? So in that same vein, I wonder if it sometimes, and I have to be careful as well, as when I'm, as much as we think that, words don't matter, sticks and stones, all that, those kind of sayings, but it makes a difference, right? Mm-hmm. You might be emotional, but if I had been me, oh, he's passionate, right? No, I'm probably more of a hothead than you are, but that probably made you at the same time think, again, your first reaction was, oh, it's because I'm a woman, right? Like I've got that emotion, but I've noticed that a lot of times that's not it, right? I've seen men that are way more emotional sometimes, but we don't say that, right? It's just, oh, they're passionate. Oh, they're cranky, right? They're different ways. Yeah. So just being careful.
Yeah. So I feel like yes, and I have to kind of manage that. That's why I feel like I have to manage that a little bit more, even just so I don't, hey, the world is the way it is. I need, you got to think about the perception. It doesn't matter, what you intended to say. It's how people perceive you. So you got to, unfortunately, right or wrong, we have to manage that to an extent.
So now, as a senior director, I'm assuming from at this point now, as you're kind of moving up the ranks, you've gone from individual contributor to manager, director, now senior director. Now at this point, I would think that in most people's eyes, the next logical step is now go towards like a CIO role. So what was that point like for you, or were you fine being at that senior director level, and kind of what was the next step for you?
Well, I was senior director. I was kind of like assistant CIO, so didn't quite have the power of a CIO, but I still had operational. I had to manage, other directors, team that you were on at the time, and which, like I said, at that point, you don't know I don't know a lot of technology, so I have to rely on everybody else to give me that feedback to make good decisions working with the CIO. So I thought about becoming a CIO, but I ended up, as a senior director, I ended up doing a lot of relationship management, a lot of, I guess the most fun part of that job was I could select projects that I wanted to. do more often. So, if there was a problem on the campus, a need, I could address that, and I had enough clout that people would listen to me. And then my boss at the time was, good about, well, yeah, we can do, that's a worthwhile project, go ahead, So that was nice, and I had the relationships to be able to get resources and work with people and figure out the budgets and go talk to everybody. And so I could select projects, and also, in addition to the projects that the team was feeding up, things that the college wanted, so that was kind of nice, being able to see that stuff through. But around that time, I think at the time the CIO wasn't going to move. And so I did kind of start looking outside a bit. It was more of a lateral and other director position, just because I wasn't so sure I could take a CIO role on at a whole nother, even if it was another academic institution, it's still like I haven't been a CIO yet. So I was looking around at the time, and then I don't know how it happened, but at some point I was looking at since I was working IT at the college, I was looking at what the professors were doing, and they were creating courses and interacting with students. And I'm like, that seems like fun. So I actually went over, and instead of going the CIO route, I actually went over the professor route, and I started moving towards teaching. And, they were receptive because I had been in the IT department, they knew me. So I actually took a pivot and a pay cut to do that. But it's a completely different world, moving into teaching and being a professor at the college. But yeah, I guess it was a turning point, and I thought about becoming a CIO. It just wasn't available at the time, and then I kind of was thinking about what I wanted to do, and I ended up moving into teaching, basically to try to almost like I wouldn't call it a lateral. It was not a lateral, but just to do something completely different than IT operations. So that's kind of how I made that move.
So I know when you went to go for the manager position, you weren't sure if you could do it, but someone had told you, like, hey, I think you'd be good for that. Mm-hmm. Do you think it would have helped you? And again, we don't know for sure, but if someone had gone through and said, hey, you know what, I think you would make a good CIO, or hey, there's openings, do you think you would have been more apt to try it? I'm not saying that you made a bad decision one way or the other, right? Things work out for a reason, in my belief.
Yeah.
But do you think that insecurity of, well, I've never been a CIO before, I don't know if I can do that, would that have helped?
Perhaps, yeah, perhaps. I think I'm a little bit better now at networking than I was back then, because actually this new working as a professor now and trying to connect students to jobs, that's actually improved my networking game quite a bit. But yeah, I think it might have kept me on that track, but I'm not 100% sure, because I really started looking at a different area that I'd never thought of before, teaching, and thought, wow, that looks like a lot of fun, and now, and I can work and teach technology that I never got to touch as a manager. So because I didn't really get to program anything or set anything up or build anything as a manager. So it was kind of I think at that time, I could have gone either or, I guess, but I don't regret it. I think, I think I could always go back on that track. There's leadership roles too in academics that I could take within our department. So it's opened up new avenues, so that I wouldn't have expected. So sometimes you think, well, you're going to do this one job and it's a pay cut only. Well, no, it gives you a whole new skill set. So it's actually, so I don't regret it at all. But back to your point though, perhaps if somebody had been really like, no, I think you're on that track, maybe I would have, and something would have been available. Of course, it gets really skinny at the top, right? There's not that many CIO positions. So yeah, certainly it probably, yes, I would say. So that's why I think that mentorship is important. I actually had one of the staff that we had, I had been talking to him about his career because he was young, and he was talking about, it's been a while, but he was talking about what he wanted to do as far as career paths. And I'm like, well, we don't have that here. So I said, you know what, if you really want to move on and make a lot better money, you're going to have to leave CSN and you're going to have to go a different route. Like in that case, it was a corporation. So I kind of just gave him that advice. And then, a few years later, he pinged me on LinkedIn and said, hey, thanks for that advice. I'm really glad you made me think that I should make that move now. And I did. And now he's working for a credit card company. And he's like, I really love this job. I love working with different types of technology. So yeah, I think, I provided that mentorship to him, and he thanked me later. I had forgotten about it. But yeah, I think so too, whereas that helped me early on to make the jump into management, it probably would have helped too with CIO.
I also think you mentioned something important, right? Like it was completely different. You got to explore and try it out, right? Even now, if, I know you've been doing it for a few years, but if you decided you didn't want to go, you can always go back.
Yeah, absolutely. I have the confidence that I know I can go back, and I've actually still tried to maintain that network and work on side projects and things. So I think I got back and more hands-on into technology. I started teaching Linux. I'm like, I really like Linux, so I started teaching that, cloud computing, AWS and Azure and things like that. So, and then in addition to that, I ended up getting awarded a National Science Foundation grant, that we have for the college. And, that's another thing I can add to my resume now, that I can obtain external funding, to build, our cloud systems administration degree, and be able to host, cloud boot camps and get AWS people to come over and talk to students and employers and things like that. So there's a lot of satisfaction, I think. So that's why I am glad I made the move, because now it's a little more tangible. I get a student a job, I talk to an employer, I bring an employer in to help students out with their resumes, give them new experiences. The AWS Jam, we have provided that for our students 2 years in a row because of that NSF grant. And like next week, I'm going to go to Washington, D.C. and meet, other people that have grants for other schools, other faculty. So and then that's added something into my resume that I just never would have had. And it's also built my confidence up too, to where I'm like, yeah, I could be a CIO, no problem. So I think I could, not that it would be no problem, but I do think that even though I didn't have the confidence right at that moment, this move over here actually is giving me another set of skills. And now I do have confidence that I could go back into, directly into an IT department. I wouldn't be worried about being a CIO. I think I definitely would be able to handle it.
You talked about it at the beginning. When you went over there, you knew it was a pay cut.
Yeah.
And a lot of times people are afraid that, oh man, it's a pay cut, it's a demotion. It's not always a demotion, right?
No.
Like you're picking up different skills. It's a different role, and maybe that role just doesn't pay the same amount that, what you're currently doing, just because, again, you're able to pick up a different skill set. I've had some of those opportunities, and I've talked to other people where they'll go and they're like, well, it's a pay cut, but it's a different skill set. It's a different type of role. Yeah. I'm interested in doing it. Mm-hmm. And sure, maybe it is a temporary setback, but now you've built more of a network. You're gaining additional skills. Obviously, you gained even more confidence. So now you could probably go and even surpass what you were making before, if that's an avenue you want to take. But I know that teaching for you has been rewarding. And I know at some point, when we worked together, when you were the senior director and I was a manager at the college, and I'm surprised, and this is where that emotional intelligence comes in. I know we had conversations, we had talked, and I mentioned, man, I don't remember exactly what the conversation was, but it was something to the effect of, man, I think I would enjoy teaching. Like, I think that would be something fun or something I would be interested in. Mm-hmm. And you're like, oh yeah, that sounds good. Eventually we parted ways. I ended up leaving the college. And when you went into teaching, I was genuinely surprised that you reached out to me and said, hey, at one point you mentioned that you would be interested in teaching. We have a vacancy for, at that time it was a VMware course. I had done VMware, and that to me, it was surprising because I was like, man, I didn't remember the conversation initially, but after you said it, I'm like, oh, I do remember us having that conversation. And I don't remember the time frame, but it was a couple years after I had left. So it wasn't like, oh, we just had that conversation 3 months ago. This is like 2-3 years later. So that was something that, and I'll tell you that I was very appreciative to, because that's eventually what has led me towards getting better at even doing my own job. The reason I say that is, you might think you're the smartest person in the world, but if you can't explain it to somebody else, how well do you really know it and understand it? And I noticed that when I started teaching the VMware to where my VMware skills grew over time, it was like exponential, just because I understand it, but how do I explain it to somebody else? How do I tell somebody else, like a coworker, what I'm doing, or how do I hand this off? So that's something that I don't know if I mentioned to you in the past, but I'll bring it up now. But yeah, that made a big impact.
Great.
It made a big impact in me, like in my personal career, and also, just kind of getting into the teaching aspect. And eventually, I'm not gonna lie, that's what's led to this forum. Is I see the need in teaching and communicating and letting other people know, not just here's how you build technological skill sets, right?
Right.
I'm not going to build something like, hey, you want to learn VMware? Let me build all these classes. There's tons of that out there. What there's not is, how do I manage my career? Giving that advice, like, well, how do I move up within here? I think you've been very fortunate to be able to progress and really stay. I wouldn't say it's the same company, right? Because you're at the college, but basically at the same place.
Yeah, I was pretty lucky to be able to. I mean, it depends on what you want to do, right? I mean, some people, if you work for government, which is like colleges, state college, it's easier to stay in one place and kind of move up the ranks. If you have good emotional intelligence, I don't think you're going to promote a lot in management positions unless your emotional intelligence and your ability to work in a team is, and your organizational skills are good. How organized are you? Because you're going to keep track of a lot, right? Because you're not just responsible for your own work, now you're responsible for this team, staying on track. But yeah, I mean, I think, there's all different, it depends on your temperament, right? What you want. Some people want to bounce around a lot. I think you're like that. You like moving around and learning new things. I think you're brave, and I admire that. I thought I was being brave jumping into teaching, but fortunately my husband was supportive. He's like, hey, if you want to go this route, I'm sure he didn't appreciate the pay cut, but I'm making that money up now with grants and other things. You find other ways to make the income up. And then, it was surprising how much, when you're teaching now, you're a mentor. So yeah, now I'm thinking, well, I better be a better example. So I think teaching kind of makes us, if you do it right, and if you care about it, I think it'll make you a better technologist, better person, better at helping other people, because, and then the students are really appreciative. So you get a lot of, and I'm sure you've kind of experienced this too by advising students, like they're really grateful for help, and there's a lot of people out there that are willing to help. I found now that I'm in this position of professor, I can talk to a lot of IT professionals, and they are, oh yeah, I want to help your students out. So then, and I learn from them. So like, I've hosted you as a guest speaker. I host guest speakers every month for our students, and I attend every single one, because every time I talk to somebody like yourself, I'm learning. And I tell my students that, I go, this isn't just for you guys, this is for me too. Because I need to learn. I need to know what's going on in industry so I can make sure our programs are up to date. I need to find people like, hey, I could teach the VMware class, but I didn't work in it day and night like you did, so I need to go find somebody to do that, or your colleague, for the AWS class that we're teaching. So yeah, it's been, it seems like sometimes you have to follow this straight up path, but I think it's better. And I actually wish I would have done more lateral movement when I was younger, even, instead of just going up. I mean, I won't say I won't regret it, because, you never know how life would be, but definitely the lateral movements, if you can take a pay cut, if you can. I mean, not everybody can, let's be real, but if you can, you'll learn a whole new set of skills you never realized. I mean, I didn't know I could be the principal investigator on a National Science Foundation grant. I mean, I didn't know that was possible, but I got mentorship. I actually had a faculty member from a college in Texas. There was a program, and they taught me how to do that. They taught me how to justify creating a new program and keeping track of another budget through a grant. So that's a skill I would have never anticipated I would get, if I would stayed the path that I was on.
Well, and then exposure through networking, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and I think that's the thing that people think, oh, I'm going to get in technology, you hear, and I've brought this up a number of times, you hear cybersecurity, you hear networking,
Right.
you hear servers, and people think, oh, well, that's technology. Now people hear AI. Okay, well, that's what I have to do. No, there's a number of things like that. That grant that you're a part of, like, I've never even heard of that. I wouldn't even know what to do. But again, talking to people and understanding that, hey, have you looked into this avenue, or do you know how to do this? No, well, what is that? And just, I think, really being curious.
Yes.
And open-minded. You mentioned me bouncing around. I think a lot of that, some of it was brave, and some of it was just reflecting back now. It was that ADD. I would get bored. Like I got past my challenge, and I was like, I didn't have the patience to wait for something else to open up within.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, I want to build a skill set. I did not, and I still don't enjoy being stagnant.
Which is good if you're going to be in technology.
So then you go in and like, all right, well, let me try this, let me try that. Now, over time, I have noticed, and I'm curious to find your experience in kind of moving up and moving around, even though you're in the same environment, right? Still higher ed, still at the same college. Getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? Because going to a new job, every few years, that's uncomfortable, right? Because people start to feel, a security and just like, well, I know what I'm doing. I'm here. I'm safe. Yeah. Now, I can go to this other job, and it might be terrible. On paper, it looks great, but once I actually go there, it's not. As you're kind of moving up, and even moving around to going to the college, to the teaching route, what was that like? Did you feel uncomfortable? Were you okay with it?
Well, I was terrified the first time I got in front of a class because I had been a dance teacher. So I had done teaching, but that's not like teaching, a technology class. So yeah, I was worried. I actually took an additional step. I remember one of the classes I was going to take, I needed to teach a Network Plus. It was basically our intro to networking. And I hadn't looked at that certification in forever. I was very, very rusty. So I decided right away, I go into finding a mentor mode, which is why I think people really need to do that. I tell students that find mentors right away because they'll help you. So I found a colleague who was very nice, and I actually took his class the summer before I was going to teach it. And he was kind of surprised, like, oh, you're taking it. And I said, yeah, I want to get familiar with the content, but I want to see how you teach. And what better way to do that than just to take the class? So I took it, and I think I might have been the only one who actually did that at the college. But yeah, it was a good eye into learning and being. I was very uncomfortable. I was very uncomfortable the first time I had to teach people how to subnet. Because, like you said, it, but then you don't really know it until you got to try to explain it, and then explain it 3-4 different ways, and it's just because this person will get it that way and that person will get it a different way. And it's not that hard once you get the hang of it, but it can be hard at first it is kind of tough. It's a really tough thing for students to learn, subnetting. And, researching, finding videos, watching other faculty. So I really tried to do my homework to diminish the discomfort. I didn't try to dive in there like I knew everything already. And some people do that, I think, especially in IT. They're like, well, I got it. Well, maybe you may not know what you don't know. So I always have taken that, I'm going to be extra prepare. And I think teaching has actually taught me that as well, too, to be prepared, walk into the classroom, have your stuff laid out, but be flexible because the students have different needs. Some students know a lot already. Some students don't know nothing. And your communication skills, you got to appeal to all of them. You got to be able to teach all of them, fill in the gaps over here, and then, start from the ground up with that person. But, that student can sometimes make these other students feel insecure. So the way I communicate, let them know, like, hey, they just have some experience over here. And half the time, well, more than half the time, those students might appear that they know a lot, but there's major big gaps in their knowledge and they don't know as much. So, but yeah, me preparing and going back to, I know your question about being uncomfortable, even though I've stayed in the same spot, I think sometimes if you take on these really different roles, Yeah, it can be really uncomfortable, So, but that's good. I mean, you have to be. I was starting to get that way too as a senior director. I'm like, okay, I could stagnate here quite a bit. I can either try to be a senior director somewhere else, or I can try something different. And I think because I worked at a college, teaching was it was there. So I never thought about it before. If somebody told me when I was 25, hey, you're going to be a professor, I'd have been like, shut up. No way. No way. Yeah. But it's been really rewarding. And there's a lot of, I still have a lot of discomfort every time I have to think about, okay, what's the AWS has 45 more services. Which ones should we teach? How should we teach it? How much? I've got this industry advisors in front of me, I want to be able to speak to them and get the right information and have them feel comfortable that, they can give input and we're actually going to act on it. And, there's a lot of different ways that, even in the same institution, you could be, CSN's a big institution, just like a lot of corporations are. So you take on a role and it could be like you're working in a whole different environment, so.
Yeah. And it's probably when you've had the biggest growth too, right? Is being uncomfortable doing all these different things.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I know we've touched on a lot, and I think the biggest takeaway that I've got out of it is there's a couple things that you did throughout your career that were, in some cases, unconventional, right? For example, like taking, as you're going to be an instructor, before you're going to teach class, you sat in as a student, right? Which you mentioned, like a lot of teachers don't do that. They're going to go and prepare. They'll do something else instead of just taking a class, right? That's something that makes sense. And then earlier on in your career, when you also talked about, and I don't want to say it was unconventional, but it was just different, is going through on the Mac side, right? It's just nobody was doing that. You could have kind of followed along with everybody else, but hey, let me do something different. Nobody else is doing it. Let me do that, and it helped differentiate yourself, I think, in both cases.
Yeah.
So just kind of, I guess, to wrap up, is there any question that I didn't ask you that you think I should have, or any kind of last thoughts or information that you think, hey, this is something that I think people should be aware of?
Yeah, I think we covered a lot, but I guess the biggest takeaway I feel is people underestimate the power of networking and asking for a mentor, going and finding somebody. Because if you ask for a mentor, if you talk to people, you don't have to ask, will you be my mentor? But, if talking to people, building the network, joining groups, Society of Information Managers is one that we are, that's for IT leaders, but I participate in that group, help them jump on committees and things like that. I just think the networking is so important for you to know what's out there, because I think it's easy, especially like in my case, I could have sat in my position at CSN and you can insulate yourself quite a bit and I'm comfortable. But if you're networking and you're forcing yourself to get off the couch and go to that networking event or, talk to those people, you really realize that, that there's a wider world out there, and I might be missing out on opportunities and learning things and events. And there's so much out there now. There's just so many meetup events and things online that you can join, and it's just, if you're out there looking, there's just a lot of places where you can learn and build a network. So I just think that's so important now, especially with, I work for a public institution. It's not going to shut down necessarily, so I'm fairly secure, but other companies will lay people off that have been there 20 years. They don't care. They'll just reorg and you're gone. So I think it's good. I think you can always need that network, no matter how secure you think you are. And also it opens your mind to other opportunities that you might not have thought of. So you don't know what you don't know. So network with people, force yourself to get out there and talk to people and participate in that larger, in our case, IT community.
And even if you're an introvert, right? I mean, you don't have to go and speak on stage, but I mean, you can find other like-minded people, and you'll see. I've been to enough events to where I feel comfortable now, but originally, I would go and just kind of like, I'm just going to attend. I'm just going to sit here and watch, and you'll see other people. Try that person, right? Like that person's probably not as outgoing, at least to get past that initial fear or that uncomfortableness of asking somebody, because you mentioned it before, like seeing people's expressions. You can tell that person's probably uncomfortable there.
Yeah.
You're uncomfortable, try that person first. And then maybe you'll start to kind of build that confidence or that muscle to go and say, all right, well, that person looks like they talk a little bit more. Let me go try that person.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I mean, even when I'm fairly extroverted and I still get, oh, can I talk to those people? Oh, are they interested? I think we all go through that, but it's a fake it till you make it scenario. So I just think that's really valuable throughout your whole entire career. And teaching's actually taught me to maintain that or build that network and not make sure that, okay, I got to get out to this event, even if I don't want to right now and I'd rather do a million other things, I better get out there. And I never regret it. It's like going to the gym. You hate going, but when you leave, you're like, oh, that was nice. I feel good about myself. So yeah, I think networking is even better, really good for that. So that's probably my biggest takeaway, I guess, that I'd want people to, from my perspective.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you coming on and, sharing your experiences and also relaying to other people what you think is valuable and just things that you've learned along the way.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks.